Well, the new Final Fantasy set has been spoiled, and with that comes a new change to the rules of Magic. As a means of conveying the summon abilities in the Final Fantasy cards, the set is filled with enchantment creatures, which also have the Saga subtype. This is the first time something like this has been done in Magic. I've never played any of the Final Fantasy video games, but this seems like a flavorful way to include summoned creatures which only remain in play for a limited time. I think this is a better way to implement it than, say, giving them fading counters or vanishing counters. Turning them into enchantment creatures with the Saga and the lore counters that sacrifice after a few turns, I think that's just a really fun way to add a lot of unique effects to the creatures. But with these new Saga creatures came an update to the rules of Magic regarding Sagas. I'll quote now from the release. Quote, "We're making a small but impactful rules update with this release. With the advent of Saga creatures, it's much easier to get into a situation where a Saga on the battlefield loses all of its abilities, but is still a Saga enchantment. The result of this interaction was previously unintuitive to many players. Since that Saga had no chapter abilities, the game defined the greatest number among its chapter abilities as 0. And no matter how many lore counters that Saga had on it, it would be sacrificed as a state-based action once it wasn't the source of a chapter ability on the stack. And that happened usually right away. Starting with the release of Magic the Gathering Final Fantasy, we're updating the rules. If a Saga has no chapter abilities, it won't be subject to the state-based action that would cause it to be sacrificed due to how many lore counters it has. Similarly, it won't be subject to the turn-based action that adds a lore counter to each Saga you control at the beginning of your first main phase each turn. For example, if your summon Bahamut with one lore counter on it loses all abilities because someone attaches Observe Stasis to it, it won't gain lore counters via the turn-based action until it has chapter abilities again, probably because you removed the Observe Stasis somehow. While this change was made for the sake of Saga creatures, it's been a boon to the game's first and so far only enchantment land, Urza Saga. Blood Moon and similar effects used to act as a counterplay to Urza Saga. Turning it into a non-basic mountain would have put it into the graveyard as a state-based effect, but not anymore. With the release of the Final Fantasy set, Urza Saga will no longer be sacrificed to Blood Moon. But it's not just that. If it merely stuck around as a mountain, that would be one thing. But there's more to it. Under a Blood Moon, Urza Saga will lose all of its chapter abilities, but it gets to keep any gained abilities it's already acquired. Blood Moon will prevent Urza Saga from gaining any new lore counters, but it gets to keep any lore counters it had on it when the Blood Moon was played. And so you gotta think of it like the game chapter abilities are written on a post-it note above the Urza Saga. And then when Blood Moon enters, everything printed on the card is erased and replaced with Mountain, tap to add 1 red. But the post-it note with the gain chapter abilities above the card, those are unaffected by Blood Moon. It's on another level. So in addition to being a mountain that taps for red, an Urza Saga with 2 lore counters on it also has the ability to tap for 1 colorless mana, or to pay 2 and tap to create a Karn-esque construct. Those abilities remain and continue to function, even with a Blood Moon in play. And the reason Urza Saga keeps its chapter abilities is because of layers. Blood Moon applies at layer 4, which is the type-changing effects layer, and added abilities like those gained by lore counters apply at layer 6, which happens after. So technically, under the old rules, Urza Saga would still keep its abilities under a Blood Moon, but they were unusable because Urza Saga would be immediately sacrificed as a state-based action. But that's going to change now when Final Fantasy is released. Needless to say, this rules change has pretty big implications for mono-red Stompy decks and Prison decks, which can now play Urza Saga more easily. The ideal scenario is to cast Blood Moon when you have an Urza Saga on Chapter 2. Then it will allow you to create constructs every turn. But even barring the best case scenario, playing Urza Saga after a Blood Moon is not a wasted land drop, since it still becomes a normal mountain. If an opponent's churning out construct tokens every turn under a Blood Moon, you can't even use Wasteland to get rid of it, since Blood Moon removes Wasteland's ability to destroy lands. It's worth noting that if you play an Urza Saga with a Blood Moon in play, it will still enter with the first lore counter on it, but Blood Moon will prevent it from gaining its first ability to tap and add 1 colorless mana. If Blood Moon gets removed later, then after your next draw step in that first main phase, when Urza Saga will then get a second lore counter, and it will gain the ability to create the construct creature token. but it will likely never be able to gain its first ability unless you're somehow able to remove all the counters from it, and then when it gains its first lore counter back, then it would gain the first ability. And this works differently from how Dark Depths or similar lands which enter with counters under Blood Moon, because with Blood Moon out, those lands no longer have those abilities, and so they don't enter with counters. Saga's entering with counters is a rule attached to the Saga type. It's not an ability which Urza Saga has, so Blood Moon doesn't affect it. If you've been meaning to pick up a copy of Urza Saga for Commander, I would probably wait. The price has been pretty consistent between $30 and $40 ever since the card was released. I could see it getting a slight bump as a result of this slight buff, but I don't expect it to hold a higher price. The buff likely won't be enough to get the card banned in Modern or Legacy. Now, if that happened, I would imagine the price would drop quite precipitously. I could see it getting banned in one or more formats if it was oppressive enough. Legacy is the more likely one, since it would be easier to drop a first or second turn Blood Moon and make sure Urza Saga is more potent if you can get, say, Urza Saga turn 1 and then Blood Moon turn 2 and start churning out Karn constructs. But there's a chance it could get banned in Modern. I think if it did, the price would drop, and I'd say that'd be a great time to pick those up. The next banned and restricted update is June 30th. It's 1 month away. So we'll have to see what happens. Let me know if you like these Magic rules discussions. I'd be happy to do more of these in the future. But thanks for listening, and take care.